Welcome to the Kentucky Trauma Therapist Podcast.
Hey, this is Casey with Kentucky Trauma Therapist, and today I have Whitney, who is also a Kentucky Trauma Therapist, with us. And Whitney, I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourself before we dive into the topic of social workers and mental health practitioners and how domestic violence can happen to us too. So, Whitney, do you care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Whitney King. I am originally from Syersville, Kentucky, but I live in Richmond, Kentucky, Central Kentucky. And I've been a social worker for about 5 years, and I'm happy to be here today.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited. I've traditionally always been on the western side of the state, and I love that you're here to talk about the eastern side of the state. And somewhere in the middle of Kentucky, I feel like we get some more urban areas between Owensboro, Bowling Green, Louisville, and Lexington. But a huge chunk of Kentucky is still very rural, and rural social work is just, it'll always hold a special place in my heart. So, talking today, I reached out to you a couple of weeks ago about the topic because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and just, I was like, "Ooh, Whitney would have a lot to say on this topic." And I know we're recording now in November, but all the same, the topic's still prevalent.
Mhm.
I think especially with the holidays coming, a lot of folks have a lot more stress anyways, so we tend to see more resources needed in this area, period, around this time of the year.
Mhm.
But when I first brought the topic up to you, can you just tell me what first came to your mind? What topics came to your mind?
Regarding like domestic violence and intimate partner violence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, just how I've seen like a lot of increase in violence between like, it's more on the news that you're seeing a lot of homicide-related domestic violence, how there was recently, within this past year or so, a social worker who passed away who, um, it had come out there was domestic violence in that situation, and just how it's so much more prevalent than we know, like, than we acknowledge. I remember during COVID how I feel like it doubled. There was kind of like this intensity. The statistics kind of changed a little bit during COVID because people were indoors all the time, and that like increased DV and intimate partner violence between people. So yeah, there's definitely a lot to we can talk about with it.
And I think too the aspect of clinicians, mental health providers, social workers, which you and I are both social workers, we tend to think it won't happen to us. I think
Mhm,
we preach to everyone, anyone, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of race, or
mhm,
whether you went to private school or you have a graduate degree, it doesn't matter. It can happen to you too.
yeah.
Uh, One of the things with social workers, I actually talked to my priest about this one time. He mentioned folks who go into helping professions tend to have that savior complex.
Mhm.
And not that that's a bad thing, and I don't think he meant it in like, "Oh, there's something wrong with having that," but this idea of you're willing to help people at times regardless of the cost to you, and
Mhm.
how we might take that from our profession and actually try and apply it in our day-to-day life, including in our
Yes.
relationships, which means not always having the healthiest of boundaries or not catching
Mhm.
on to red flags because we're so willing to want to help others. It's kind of ingrained in our personality.
Mhm.
So, you mentioned the DCBS worker, and, for those of who might be listening out of state, DCBS is like our version of Child Protective Services in the state of Kentucky. It stands for Department of Community-Based Services. Do you care to shed a little bit of light about what happened with that worker?
Yes. So, I don't have the, like, full details in front of me, but from my understanding, it was she was a victim of homicide by her partner, and then he, also passed away, um possibly from suicide, so it was considered either like a homicide suicide or something of that nature along the way. And I think that brought up a lot for people in the social work field that one, it can happen to social workers, and two, that I think anytime there's visibility of someone passing away from DV, it kind of sends a shockwave to people who are in the situations and who have survived the situations. Like all the time, like we say, like, when we're doing psychoeducation on DV, we talk about 40% of DV ends in homicide. And like it's one thing to logically understand that statistic, but it's another to like see it play out in your community. And this has been like one of 3 in Kentucky that has been on the news this past year of homicides related to domestic violence.
Was it in Bardstown? I feel like I saw it in Bardstown, Kentucky, where there was a woman who was at the courthouse for her DVO hearing. And I guess explaining definitions real quick. In the state of Kentucky, you file for an EPO, which is an emergency protective order. A judge stamps off on that. They go serve the abuser the paperwork, or the perpetrator alleged in the case. And then I know on our side of the state, usually within a week, 2 weeks at most, you have a DVO hearing, which is
Mhm.
where both parties are expected to appear. And if there's enough evidence to show a need or a cause for a DVO stands for domestic, is it domestic violence
Violence order.
order?
And then if you're not married, it's an IPO, interpersonal protection order.
Okay. And if they
So
grant
there's
that, they usually last, like, what is it, 1, 2, or 3 years, I think is the max before you can
I
apply
think
again?
it's, yeah, 3 years, and then you can recertify every 3 years as needed. So you can get it up to a lifetime if there's probable reason that that person would cause harm.
Yeah. Yeah. The case I'm thinking of in Bardstown, and again, I don't have this pulled up right in front of me, but I think they were there for the court hearing in regards to the DVO. The perpetrator showed up in the court parking lot and then murdered the woman who had attempted to procure a DVO against him, and I think a few other folks were shot in that situation as well, which
Mm.
it's yeah. Uh, when we see that in the news, do victims of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, when they take that information in, if that's not even more fear to wanna ask for help,
Yeah,
you know?
I can see how it would feel isolating. I can also see how it can maybe be empowering at the same time, like, I'm not gonna be that statistic, like, I've seen that mindset before, of one side of it being like, oh, like, fear that you're never gonna get out, and then the other side being the push that gets you out, like, seeing something like that, like, like, the last saying that's like, "I have to get out of this," or, "I have
To
to
be
get some
safe
kind
getting
of."
out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and get some kind of, like, safety going, because that's another big thing that is such a big misinterpretation in our society is, like, you hear people say all the time, like, "Well, why didn't you just leave?" It's not simple. It is not that simple. Okay, yeah. It doesn't work that way, and if you look at it, the most dangerous time for someone to get seriously injured or hurt is when they leave. Like, when you think about it, like, that process of leaving, is one of the most dangerous times for someone in this situations. It's not that like, it's not black and white. It's really there's a
Yeah.
lot to it.
My brain, I think caught on fire when you said that, 'cause I was so I
Yeah.
we're trying to start doing, well, I don't know if I told you this or not. We're working on doing a Kentucky trauma therapist blog as well.
Mhm.
And when I reached out to you, I was like, "Ooh, the perfect blog post would be around trying to explain to family members and loved ones why don't they just leave?" And I
Mm.
started to sit down and write it, and I feel like my brain broke, and because trying to explain to a layperson
Yeah.
why someone doesn't leave, because to them, it's like, well, if someone treats me bad, I'll just quit interacting with them.
Mhm.
But domestic violence is very incestuous in the fear that it can. And I kept trying and I kept trying to narrow down, like, how do I even begin to explain
Mhm.
this? And I had gotten to the root of you have to explain that perception is a person's reality.
Mhm.
So if I perceive that behind this door behind me that there's danger there, then I'm going to act as if there is danger there. So if
Yeah.
you mentally break down someone, and I know we're kind of all over the place, but I'm all over that place.
No,
We
that's,
talk,
like, really real. Yeah.
yeah, when we talk about the types of domestic violence, you know,
Mhm.
if no one's hitting people on first dates and they're sticking around, like that's not how it works. It's very progressive. It's over
Mhm.
time. It's very cyclical. I think
Yeah.
back to school when we talked about, there's this picture, and I don't remember who wrote it or who published this, but the essence of, you have the honeymoon phase, the build up phase, and then you have the first event of violence,
Mhm.
which we can define violence here in a moment. And then we go back to like that guilt phase and I'm so sorry, the remorse, and we build back up into the honeymoon phase. And over time,
Mhm.
that spiral gets smaller and smaller to where the incident of honeymoon phase, act of violence, and remorse, it's happening much quicker.
Yeah.
Maybe it took 2 years for the first episode to occur, or 5 years, maybe 10. And
Mhm.
then the next incident of violence, maybe it's less than then. Maybe it goes to
Mhm.
yearly or every 6 months, every few months, and then we get to a point where it's daily, and that person already feels trapped, almost like a Venus flytrap slowly closing in.
Mhm.
So, yeah, usually there's been years of encouraging a victim to change their perception of reality through small acts of violence or large acts
Mhm.
to a point where that person it reminds me of not Munchausen, Stockholm syndrome,
Mhm.
how you convince someone that they're not worthy, no one else is ever going to love you as much as I do. You're
Mhm.
worthless. If you try and leave, I'm going to take the kids away from you. You'll never see them again.
Mhm.
It's so slow and gradual that people don't realize they're caught in the trap of domestic violence, intimate partner violence until it feels like it's too late and there's no way out or
Yeah.
that they don't deserve out. Do you care to go over with me like what are some of the maybe misconceptions around
Mhm.
the definition of violence that shows up in DV?
I think a lot of people think it's physical or sexual violence. That's like a and I feel like movies kind of portray this as like giving us an idea like of the wrong idea. And it can be physical and it is physical and it is sexual for, a good like a certain population of people. However, there's a lot of it that's like mental, verbal, financial, um, like, you know, financial is a big one I see that people don't recognize is that someone controls the finances. Like, you have no way to pay for anything. That's a form of power control. Now, there's some relationships where it's talked about and they can work, finances aren't necessarily a red flag in some relationships if it's talked about appropriately. But for people who are power, like controlling and, exerting power in a relationship, financial abuse is a big one. Like, it starts with, "You can't buy that. You can't go and get that coffee." "Well, do you really wanna buy like, do you really think you need that?" Like, things like that. Like, that's where it can start with finances. Mental and verbal abuse, it can be gaslighting, love bombing, like giving gifts, like love and then taking it away really quickly and then being like, "Oh, well, then you need me." Like, this idea of, like, being dependent, you know what I mean? Like, love bombing in a way. Verbally, it can just be subtly, like, emotionally neglecting someone's needs and then moving up to emotional harm, like negative comments, and it can be very subtle at first. It can be, "Do you really think that?" Like, stuff like, "Do you really think that this?" or "Do you really think that?" or like, just kind of implementing power and control, and then it eventually gets to a point where it's out of control, but these little things, like, they kinda start really subtle for people, and then they like kind of snowball into this big thing later on that most survivors can look back and say, I can pinpoint when this behavior started. I can tell you the day this started, kinda give me, like, an understanding of it. Um, and then, gaslighting's a big thing that's used. I know
Yeah,
gaslighting's like a big term in society right now, but true gaslighting is manipulation, like, really just I never said that, if someone says
sure,
statements like that when they did, that's true gaslighting.
sure. Yeah, I always go back to this domestic violence will to try and explain to folks because one of the worst things that happens, I feel like in our field as therapists is trying to convince a client like, hey, this is domestic violence. And they're like, no, 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 no. They pull up the image of like the burning bed movie,
Yeah,
which I watched that in one of my
me
women's
too.
studies classes in college. And, that is a great example, but that's
Yeah.
not every single person's story of domestic violence.
Mhm.
Using
Yes.
economic abuse, making her ask for money, only giving her an allowance, using coercion and threats. This is a one I see pretty often. Like, I will kill myself if you leave.
Mhm.
So making someone feel responsible for their death, which is you talk about the weight that has. And then if you throw in something like religion,
Mhm.
where like God won't forgive you for this, I don't think that's really well. That's using intimidation,
Yeah.
um, destroying property and pets. That's one I see a lot. And that's a tough topic that I think could be its whole own episode.
Yes.
Is how abusers use pets to
Mhm.
gain power and control over their victims.
And the lack of resources for shelters who take pets. That's a big one. I don't know how many times when I was, a new social worker, one of the biggest things was, how am I gonna bring my pet? And that was a huge hurdle that I kept seeing was, this is a big piece of it. We need resources for animals if people are gonna get out of these situations.
And being able I feel like I remember the first time I worked, a case for I did investigations when I worked for DCBS, and I had a situation where the person we were trying to help kept telling me, like, "I would love to leave, but what about all of these pets? Like, what is going to happen?" And, of course, we have to have boundaries in our
Mhm.
job, and there was isolation that was used in that specific situation where there was no family within hours away. And, of
Yeah.
course, isolation also included, like, this individual didn't have a chance to like, no one in their family knew what was going on because there was never an allowance to
Mhm.
talk to family. Emotional abuse is a very common one I see where people, eventually, like, the victim of domestic violence will even they use that voice in their own head, that persecutory voice. Well, it's
Yes.
not that bad. I've seen so much
Mhm.
worse. Um, he or
Yeah.
she doesn't hit me.
Mhm. Or hearing that person's voice, like, in their head, like, not hallucinations, but, like, it can get so deep that people can hear, like, the things that they would say if they try to leave or try to do something differently.
Sure. Sure. Isolation, I think that can also include like which there's a lot of and I have to remind myself like the mental health field, I do not know as if our research has evolved to the degree of technological advances we've had, but like
Mhm.
what is common culture appropriate with your partner looking through your phone? And each couple can say something differently, but and I think that that's kind of a gray area of when is that appropriate and when is it not? Like if someone's searching through your phone for hours and
Mhm.
hours trying to find, I when you sent this message, like were you talking about me being to a point where that person, even if they wanted to ask for help, can they feel safe even using their own phone to do so?
Mhm.
Um, and minimizing, denying, and blaming, shift it, which that goes back to tactics. uh, avoidance of accountability. You made me hit you. You made
Mm,
me have to throw that against the wall because you just made me so angry. Um, Using the children, which that is, I don't know.
I think that's a huge one.
In Kentucky, seeing the transition over time of how divorce cases are handled. Like I remember, I don't know, back in the 90s, it was pretty traditional. Like one parent would be awarded, primary custody and the other parent would get every other weekend custody. Right. And now in Kentucky, they've really been trying, at least on our side of the state, trying to promote like a true 50-50.
Mhm.
And the sickness of being that person, that victim, like, well, if I leave, it's not a promise or guarantee that I get to take the children with me.
Yeah.
And I'm still going to have to co-parent with this person for the next 18 years or however old the kid is. And do I just need to stick around because at least I can ensure that they're, to the best of my ability, that they're safe while they're in the care of this partner?
Mhm.
Like that's makes me want to vomit.
Yeah.
This specific one I pulled up and I just grabbed one. You can find this image anywhere. For those of y'all who might actually be watching this episode rather than just listening, if you Google domestic violence wheel, um, you can find a myriad of examples of this. I want to point out this one specifically says using male privilege, but I don't think we always talk a lot or enough about domestic violence that happens in LGBT relationships
Mhm.
or where men are victims of domestic violence.
Mhm.
I had my minor in college for my bachelor's degree was women's studies, and there was this professor was second wave feminist, and she was really big on there is no such thing as men being victims of domestic violence, and that kinda irked me, which, I mean, that's second wave feminism theory, I think, kinda shining through there, and there was a time and place for that, but I think we don't talk about men being victims of domestic violence, and that is
Mhm.
I'm seeing it more and more now in the field
Yes.
with clients we work with than ever before.
Mhm.
So I don't wanna leave these populations out or LGBT domestic violence, that is that's a population that experiences a lot of minority trauma,
Yes.
due to minority status, they already come with a lot of trauma and how that can
Mhm.
end up catapulting into a relationship in the future. But so when we say domestic violence, we're not saying like that's not just someone laying hands on you.
Mhm.
It can be mental, it can be verbal, emotional. It it can include like finding malicious ways to utilize the children to get what you favorably want. Yeah. So how when we talk about it can truly happen to anyone. I guess that's
Mhm.
really where I want to hit home in this episode because I want us to talk about the prevalence of it happening to social workers and mental health clinicians because I don't think we talk about it enough.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I think I know for me, I'll just throw my own self under the bus. Pride and ego came up for me.
Mhm.
I'm a survivor of a domestic violence situation, and pride and ego was definitely something that came up for me. Like, I help people with this all day long. I could never let it happen to me. That was
Mhm.
my mentality. And um, I saw so many therapists over the year. And every time one of the therapists wanted to comment on, well, are you sure that you know, maybe the problem isn't you. Maybe it has to do with your environment and was trying to hint at I would all of a sudden be
Yeah.
cured and I'd be like, "Oh, I don't need therapy anymore." Very subconsciously, like
Mhm.
therapist doesn't want to address how I'm always the problem, then I don't know if this will continue to be helpful. But pride and
Yeah.
ego was a big thing for me. Like, well, I've went through all of these courses and I know how to
Mhm.
smell domestic violence from anywhere. And then the moment when it hit me, what was happening, I've been in
Mhm.
the field for ever, and I just felt like I was
Yeah.
blindsided.
I think, I've survived intimate partner violence myself, specifically when I was a new social worker. And I think for me, there was a lot of shame involved. Like I shamed myself a lot. I remember this therapy session where my therapist didn't come out and say it. She made me take this quiz, like this like inventory. And she says, "Do they do this? Do they do that?" And I lit up that thing like a Christmas tree, like honestly. And she just puts it down and looks at me, and she was the sweetest soul in the world. She's like, "Whitney, think this is happening. I think this is real. I think it's time we like figured it out." I'd worked with her for a long time, and I'm so grateful for that because that's the first person who said, "I think that you're a victim, and I think we need to figure out a way to get you out of this." And I remember feeling like someone punched me, in my gut, but I also felt really empowered. Like someone saw me and I was in this safe space and they were going to help me figure it out. And then through, therapy, I was specifically in trauma therapy for myself. We were just kind of unraveling that and untangling that and understanding how it was unhealthy before I left. I wasn't even out yet. I was just identifying, like, okay, these are the patterns. This is why it's not healthy. Almost like I needed justification to leave. Like it was like I needed proof in the pudding. Like it wasn't just in my head. Because that was the biggest thing I battled when leaving was like, is this real or is this just in my head? Because this other person obviously wasn't a healthy person for me and was kind of the opposite, saying the opposite of what their actions were doing. And I think that's a huge thing for people. And I had so many experiences early on working with survivors, and I remember having this idea of like, okay, mine's not physical, so I don't have to leave yet. Mine's not this, so I don't have to leave. Mine's not that, so I'm okay. And then yes, yes, and I was like, "What am I doing? Like, this makes no sense. Like, you're an educated, like, woman, Whitney. Like, let's get it together, girl." And I remember, like, right before I got out, I had this moment of, "Oh my gosh." It's like I woke up and took the rose-colored glasses off, and I was like, "This is so bad." Like, and even I'll just be candid here, like, I even had this, like, I'm gonna die, like, I'm not gonna make it out of this alive. And just kind of, like, I didn't think I was gonna get out. Like, I truly at the end was like, I'm not gonna make it out of this, and then I'm gonna have to figure out a way to write something. I was, like, writing things, like, if this happens to me, no, like, I tried to leave. Like, I tried to get out. I made plans, like, I safety plan with my therapist. I had all these things, and then I got out, and that was insane for my brain. I felt like I was so
Yeah.
intertwined with this person that leaving felt like someone had tore my arm off. Because another part of this is that you also love a person that can hurt you. And you're like trying to untangle that. Like you're trying to say, okay, two things can exist. I really cared for this person and they really hurt me at the same time. And that's not okay.
Yeah.
And like kind of untwisted. So it took a good year and I went back once because
Yeah.
I was convinced. I was like, I've been out for a year, maybe it wasn't that bad. I almost like lying to myself. I went back and I was like, nope, it was that horrible. Like,
Self-gaslighting that you begin
yeah.
to it's that persecutory voice almost. Yeah. Yeah. No, I feel that.
But I just want to say for everyone listening or watching, you do get out. You can get out and you can have a beautiful life. And if I wouldn't have left that relationship, I would have never met my husband, who is a golden retriever. He's amazing. I'm having a baby. Like, that would not be happening like this in a healthy relationship and breaking a cycle with my child. That is that's the beautiful other end of getting out. Is that these things are possible. And I think we need to like remember that. Like, that there is hope on the other side, even though it feels like there is none currently. Because if you would have told me 4 or 5 years after that, that I would be married in a healthy relationship and having a baby, I would say you've lost your freaking mind. I would say, no, that doesn't happen for Whitney. Like, even though she was a social worker, no, it's not in my book. And it's because I had to break a cycle. I had to heal. And when you get out, you're responsible for your healing once you're out. And that was the hard part. I had some really good therapists who challenged the piss out of me. And I would throw things. I ain't gonna lie to y'all. I would throw stuff at the wall, and she let me. She was like, throw it, girl.
Get it out of your system. Yeah.
But I was thankful for that because that's what I needed to heal.
Yeah. Yeah. I reflect a lot on there's this story, and it's actually based off of one of my family members, why this story even exists in my head. But I call it the mashed potato story. And the concept is, let's say, and I am going to use a stereotypical heterosexual example couple in this example, but there's a man and wife, and let's say they have 6 children, and she goes to make dinner and she puts dinner on the table, and the husband comes in and he says, "By God, woman, there's too much damn salt in these mashed potatoes." And he flips the table, and by the end of the night, he beats all the children and his wife. She begins to, because of the years of slow buildup of domestic violence, she's going to assume this is my fault. I am responsible for controlling how other people treat me in order to keep myself safe, which that's a
Mhm.
perception of reality that is very twisted. You can't control how other people treat you. You can influence how people treat you. Like if I come up and say something nasty to you, you might not want to hang out with me. That might influence you, but it doesn't force how you end up treating me. But unfortunately, over time with domestic violence, we begin to get that drilled in our head. I am responsible for controlling how other
Mhm.
people treat me. In order to keep myself safe, I have to act a certain way. So the woman in this story, she's like, well, tomorrow when I make dinner, I won't put any salt in the mashed potatoes to keep me and my children safe.
Mm.
But the next night comes along, dinner set out on the table. The husband walks in and he says, "By God, woman, I told you dinner should be done by 5 o'clock, not 5:20." And he flips the table, and by the end of the night, he beats all the children and the wife. That's to kind of, I like that example because it starts to poke holes in the illusion that I have done some type of behavior to warrant the abuse I'm receiving, or the
Mhm.
belittling, or the talking down to, or this pain that I
Mhm.
experience. I appreciate you so much for sharing your narrative and the fact that there can be light on the other side of that tunnel. How many folks stay out of fear of, because what is behind the door of a life without them, and
Yeah.
the perpetual like gaslighting, or I think back even to like the small things that are said over time
Mhm.
that challenge your reality of yourself, so that you get to a point where you feel like you can't keep yourself safe. You can't
Mhm.
protect yourself. Like this person
Yeah.
has become the center of my universe.
Mhm.
What do you think are some very specific, like Kentucky or rural population cultural aspects that encourage women or victims? Sorry,
Mhm.
I fell into that trap again. Victims to
Yeah.
stay in domestic violence relationships.
I think finances is a big thing. I think that let me just preface by saying this. I think it's beautiful if you and your partner can decide if one person stays home and another person works, if you can do that in a healthy way, if there's checks and balances in that system. However, I see that happening if one person's like a sole income provider and the other partner is at home all day, whether that be male, female, non-binary. That seems to be a risk factor in the start of things. Like sometimes, not always, just sometimes. Um, in rural, religion is used a lot. So there is a strong
Yeah.
belief that divorce is wrong, except for adultery. That's like a big thing in Kentucky. And even then, that you should go to counseling and work it out. I don't know. But I would say, like, I'm religious myself, and I don't believe that. But I
Yeah.
think that's a big one used. how many times do I hear that? Like, well, I can't get divorced because God would be mad at me or God would punish me or I wouldn't get to go to heaven. Like, there's a spirituality piece in Kentucky and religion with domestic violence.
Sure.
And it can be used as coercion. I'm not saying it's people in the church, but, sometimes it can be. Sometimes it can be because other people in your church environment are also victims and
Yeah.
they truly don't believe any different than that. So that's another factor in this. There's a big thing in Kentucky, not just Kentucky, I'd say rural Appalachia possibly, where I see a trend of we just don't talk about things. We
Oh,
sweep it
yeah.
under the rug. I call it the sleep honey. We sweep it and we gossip
Yeah.
about it, and that's not good. We say, "Well, did you hear?" That's a very rural thing. I'm like, "Well, if you heard, then you should probably talk about it." That's my philosophy, but that goes with abuse too. Like that's any kind of abuse in rural Appalachia. You tend to see like generational things that are passed down of like we don't talk about it, we don't address it because that's what we think that we should do to survive. It's kind of a survival skill. If I
Yeah.
don't put attention to it, then it's not real. So like this learned kind of behavior that happens in rural America sometimes. But I also will say, like, there's a story. I hope my great aunt's okay with me telling this story, but there's a story of my grandma survived domestic violence, and it was pretty intense. My great aunt shows up with a shotgun. She's like, "She's coming with me, or I'm gonna shoot you." And that to me is the embodiment of rural female empowerment. I'm not saying please don't go, waving guns around, obviously, but I was raised by my great aunts. They taught me how to be a tough woman,
Yeah.
and when I survived it, I feel like that's the reason I was able to get out because I had that spirit of them in me. But she tells me in the story of we didn't have social workers back then, so I was the law. Like I went up there, pew pew, I was like, she's coming with me, that's it. And so that's also the other side to this is that while there's a lot of traditional things that are passed down through generations, there's also really strong people in Appalachia that will literally cut you if you come for someone they love. They literally will. And,
Yeah.
I
We've got
wouldn't try it.
the amount of sinkholes that exist in Kentucky, the cave system, the mining communities. I think of, I used to teach a class in Pike County. No, it wasn't
Mhm.
Pike, it was Hazard. It was Hazard County, Kentucky.
Yeah, that's rural.
Beautiful. It's beautiful.
It's
And
beautiful.
I love that strengths perspective that you're coming from. And I remember, I just love rural social workers, the creativity that we have to come up with in order to survive. And
Mhm.
it's inherited in our bones. I love that.
Yeah.
When I was teaching in Hazard, and this was something that was very unique that I had never seen before. There was this gas station I would always stop at before I went to go teach class. And
But I know what
this,
it is.
I don't know how big Hazard is because I always drove in to this one spot,
Uh-huh.
but it was near the UK campus or the extended campus they had. And I think it was like a marathon gas station. There was a wall.
Mhm.
And I'm not exaggerating. You've seen the pin boards of missing persons before, or at Walmart, they have like half a wall. I am saying
Mhm.
this was a literal wall that was dedicated to all the missing persons in Eastern Kentucky.
Mhm.
My, my brain went to, well, might be a little bit of Kentucky justice that has occurred. We have a story of that on our western side of the
Kentucky
state,
Justice.
Kentucky justice. It's where if some of these counties are sharing one sheriff,
Yeah.
like it,
Yeah.
you call 911 and it may very well take hours
Yeah.
for someone to respond.
Mhm.
I've heard of stories on which we got a little bit of coal mining on our side, a lot more agriculture than mining though. Uh, it was a story of a sheriff who just incidentally, his daughter had been a victim of domestic violence, and they did the best they could to put someone away, the perpetrator in that. But it just so happened, like the sheriff took off work the same day that he was being released, and He just
Mhm.
never showed up for his next probation hearing. There's a maybe it's just a wives' tale, and I'm not
Yeah.
saying this to imply that perpetrators don't also need their own form of help
Yes.
to
Yeah.
prevent continuing their behaviors, that there is a chance for change. I don't know a lot of literature. I know it
Mhm.
exists, and I know that that is a reality. People can get better. There is
Yes.
also a willingness to get better,
Yeah,
and
if they want to change, that big if piece, like, people have to want to change behavior and patterns if they get treatment, and it's like,
yeah,
being like, that's a really tough thing with, you know, I think some people who are court ordered, it allows the opportunity, but will they use it? Will they use that opportunity to change? That's up to them, you know? We can provide them every resource in the book, be there, try our best, but at the end of the day, people have to also want to change behavior if they're, unhealthy too.
yeah. That reminds me of here's one of my other terrible euphemisms or stories that I like to tell. I'm always an example giver. I'm gonna blame that on my dad. Like he teaches everything in these like really wise examples, and I come up with little ones myself sometimes. But I like the concept of don't go to Home Depot for milk. Home Depot has never been known to serve milk. We have no history of them having a dairy aisle.
Mhm,
And now if Home Depot all of a sudden started advertising, "We've partnered with dairy farmers across America and will now be serving milk." Now, if I needed nails or a hammer, Home Depot definitely carries those things,
mhm,
but if I kept going weekly to Home Depot saying, "Have y'all started serving milk yet?" They're gonna look at me like I'm wild. Like, "What?"
mhm,
That's my point of saying, like, expecting someone to change without intervention. I don't care what that intervention is, which again, you've already brought it up in Kentucky culture. Religion is a big portion of our clients' narratives. And
mhm,
if that means they've started talking to their pastor, if that means that they've started seeking therapy, if that means the court systems are starting to hold them accountable, but that's a trap as domestic violence victims and survivors that we can fall into is, well, they promised me they're going to change. It's like I haven't
mhm.
seen any intervention to encourage that change.
Yeah. And I think one of the most biggest things I work on with clients, and one of the things that was most helpful myself, is if you take words out of it and you just look at actions, what does that tell you? Let's take words
Yeah,
out, let's draw a movie. Let's draw it out. If we can't visualize it, let's figure it out. What are their actions telling you? I mean, that's the bread and butter, I feel like, if someone really has changed. It is great to verbalize change, but it is the true proof in the pudding is
yeah,
actions.
yeah,
Does their actions reflect what they're saying? Does that not match up? If it doesn't match up, we're not there yet, you know? And I think that was the biggest thing for me being a survivor myself was I had to be really like I had to look at actions of everybody because I was learning something new. Like I was learning how to view things in a different way that was healthy. And I really adopted that approach. I'm not saying it works for everyone. It really worked for me and it works for a lot of the clients I work with. Just being like taking a step back and saying, what is their actions telling me? Take away their words, what does their nonverbal language tell me? What they've done? Like, have they showed up? Have they did this? Do they continue to be this person? Do they yell? Do they, are they honest? Like, those are actions things. And so
yeah,
I think that's a really big piece of it too. And another point I just want to touch on really quick in rural Appalachia is I don't think there's enough research or education on trauma responses and survival skills. I think that rural Appalachia and just rural Kentucky, we have learned generationally a lot of survival skills that we had to use to survive. The biggest thing though is that when you're at a place you don't need those anymore, then you have to challenge that a little bit and say, I don't have to use that skill anymore to survive because it might not be the healthiest. We might have had to use some things to survive a situation that could have been a trauma response. And so I feel like that's a big piece is, like, I grew up in a really impoverished area. You know, I'm not saying I don't know how to word this, but, some people do some things to get their needs met. I'm just gonna put it blankly, and I'm
Yeah,
not gonna say, specifics. They had to do that to survive, and then when they get to a point where they don't have to do that anymore, then you have to be like, "Okay, that maybe we don't have to use that survival skill anymore." We can thank that part of our trauma brain for protecting us, but we don't have to do that. And so I feel like that's a huge thing that comes up generationally. It's like, well, my mama did it and my grandma did it and it worked for me, so I'm gonna keep doing it.
yeah.
But then we don't realize that that puts us in cycles sometimes as well.
That we don't generally wanna repeat for our children either.
Yeah, absolutely. A big one is not talking about things like
Uh,
denial, kind of like maybe disassociation. Like sometimes we are okay with disassociation because we don't have to feel. We don't challenge that. We're scared to challenge that because that means, oh, I have to open Pandora's box. And last time I did, I about lost my marbles, so I can't do it.
sure.
And so that's the one I see, or a big saying back home is, I have nerves. I have nerves. I said, can you be a little bit more specific? That's not in the DSM-5. I told my mom that the other day. I said, Mom, that's not a DSM-5 diagnosis. That's just like Eastern Kentucky term, nerves. Well, they got nerves and they're on disability, and I'm like, PTSD, panic disorder, generalized anxiety. Well, I don't know specifically. That's a thing that comes up a lot too. So, like, I think that's interesting that how we talk about things too in rural Kentucky.
Yeah, I remember asking one time, like, "Well, do you get treated for anything for mental health?" And this was a loose association family member, and they're like, "No, no, I don't have anything wrong." And I was like, "Okay, okay." And you know, so you don't take any medicines for anything? And they're like, "Well, I take Zoloft for my nerves." And I was like, "So that's mental health, that's what we talk about." And
Mhm.
I do think I see some of these states that are light in countries too, that are light years away from us on how they talk about their mental health, and that is a part of our culture,
Yes.
but it was born out of a necessity to survive.
Yes, yes. And so I love asking people, what does that mean when you say that word? Can you put it into context for me? And usually, for me, it's usually either panic disorder or PTSD. They're like, well, when I go here, I'm anxious because this happened when I was little. And when I go here, I shake and my heart races and that's a flashback. And I'm like, okay, I see what's going on here. And so I think
Yeah,
that's just a really, if you're not from royal, like these things, like, you know, being a therapist, it's really important to be curious with your clients about what they're
sure.
meaning. Like, just not like, obviously, we don't ever want to make them feel like the way their experience is anything less than their experience because they're the expert in their life. But I
Right.
love just being curious with my clients and saying, can you like tell me more about that experience? Can you just elaborate on what that means for you? Just so I can understand better. And then I think recently I had my EMDR training and it was based out of Colorado, but we were on telehealth and I had kind of like this culture shock in a way. I had people in my group from Canada and Colorado, and I was
Wow.
like, and like they are so progressive in the way they talk about trauma.
Yeah,
And I'm like, "We're not there yet." Like, in Kentucky, we got a long way to go. We're getting there. We are getting there, but the things, like, the resources they have for trauma and all
sure.
this stuff, I was like, I would literally fall over. And, I think it's another big thing is, like, resource development for survivors. We need resources. We have resources, but we need more. We need more visibility. We need more access. Maybe it's just more information out there of what's available. 'Cause there are things available, you know, do people know that? So, in my office, I always keep a map of the DV and sexual assault crisis centers. I always have my power and control wheel. I have a wheel you can actually spin in my office. And I'm like, "Take a spin," like, um And so I think resource building is huge because I feel like the biggest thing in our society, especially in our state, is one, we don't talk about it, and two, we don't know where to go if we want to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting that information out there as much as we possibly can. And the resources, which I know here, the closest place for us on this side of the state, which I'm located in the General Bowling Green area, but we have Brass. It's our Barren River area safe space. But when you talk about other places being light years ahead of us, I'm not aware of many male specific domestic violence resources in this area.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of what does aftercare look like, which I know Brass, I don't know if they still do this or not, but they had an amazing program. If you completed their program, they would set you up with an apartment and help pay for
Mhm.
rent for the first year. And I think a lot of people don't realize like people out
Yeah.
there exist and want to help. And I've never heard of Brass turning away someone because they were a male victim of domestic violence, but I don't know as if they have
Mhm.
housing available for them, and I don't know what resource exists for those that specific population, but there are resources and people do want to help.
Yes, and there's also housing programs in Kentucky, like a housing voucher program that you can get certified through a DV shelter to get rent assistance for like an apartment of your choosing in a location. Our local, for those listening or watching, where I'm at, the local is Greenhouse 17. It is amazing, a beautiful campus. I've been there before visiting. And, they do a lot of that. They have, like, apartments, but they also do help with the DV housing as well, survivor housing. And I did my internship at Doves of Gateway in Moorhead, so that's the one, more eastern, and they have, like, housing there too, and it was really cool. The aftercare aspect that you're talking about for people who are survivors, like male and female, I do know a lot of them do serve meals. I don't know in what capacity, if it's just crisis or counseling or if it's, immediate shelter, that would definitely be, good questions to ask, for them, but I feel like resources are there, but I would love to see there be just so much more, and I think a big thing is, questioning, like, is it safe to go there? A lot of these facilities are very safe. They're locked facilities. They have, safety measures put in place. So if you're scared about going to these
Right.
places, there's pretty extensive security to get into some of these places. And I think that's really important to know for survivors or victims questioning if they should go,
Yeah.
that there is a lot of safety and security involved in going to immediate shelter.
Yeah, it's something that which what is the statistic? How many times is it? I think I've seen it takes on average 7 times. I've also seen the number 8 and the number 9. Like, on average, it takes 7 to
Uh-huh.
9 times of leaving before someone is successfully able to leave domestic violence.
Yes.
And I think one thing I see when I first bring up this conversation with my clients is, "Well, yeah, but it probably won't work for me." Like this mentality, like, I'm like, "Here's a phone number, we can call
Mhm.
together." And just because it's so embedded in their brain that things don't work out for them,
Yes.
like this lack of trust in others, which that could also be compounded upon just from the domestic violence they're already experiencing. I know that narrative quite well of like, well, I'm the only one that can ever help you. Like I'm the only
Mhm.
it's you and me against the world. It's only going to be like I'm your only shot. And so that difficulty to have faith that someone cares about your well-being that has never even met you yet and they're on the other end
Yeah.
of a phone call, you know? You mentioned something earlier that as we're starting to wrap up, I do want to hit on 2 things. One thing was you said it earlier, this idea of once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like once you realize like and I think that's important,
Mhm.
especially to say, well, I mean to everyone really, but once you realize what it is, it's hard to unsee it. And if you've gotten to
Mhm.
that point where if you have a history of you've been rationalizing the abuse that is occurring and making up narratives in your head that go along with the narrative that your abuser has told you that you deserve it, like this is your fault. Once you shatter that reality. And this is what makes me think it reminds me a lot of Stockholm syndrome,
Mhm.
once deprogrammed, once something has hit
Yes.
you in a certain way and you begin to hit that deprogramming
Mhm.
of, wait, maybe I'm not the problem.
Yeah. Oh, that's powerful. Woo! My clients get to that point, I'm doing cartwheels. I am when we're in therapy and they're like, "Maybe I'm not the issue." I'm like, "Yes, honey. There
Yeah,
you go."
it's powerful. And don't stop there, like,
Yeah.
once you and there's things that are practical you can do to work towards, like, trying to keep yourself safe while
Mhm.
leaving, and I wanted to cover some of those real quick. If you are doing a safe and this goes for therapists or clients, if you are doing a safety plan, you don't keep a written one anywhere, don't keep it on your phone, don't
Nope.
you memorize it the best you can, even if that includes, like, in session, like, we're going over it,
Mhm.
okay, what's our emergency plan on how we're gonna get out, point 1 through 10.
Mhm.
If you can get access, to a social worker, or DCBS worker, a therapist, the 1-800, DV hotline. If you're trying to research these things, do not do them on your phone. There's a record that can be, it kind of goes along with your Google search
Mhm.
history. Just don't even do it on your phone. Like if we can find a trusted one that
Mhm.
we can do that with, or doing that in a session. Um, what are some other things you can think of?
Logistically, like, living situations, if you're gonna get out, like, if you can get, like, as far possible, like, not within 5-mile radius, of course, but, like, just really figuring out where you're gonna stay, just, like, the logistics, where you're gonna stay, packing at least 3 to 5 outfits, food, that's the biggest thing, the safety planner, like, food, gas, and then figuring out, like, are we leaving the job? Are we going to stay with a relative? How are we gonna stay safe at the relatives? And those are the biggest things. When I went back and looked at my own story, I didn't realize that I, like, had put in place, like, little safe hubs in different cities. Like, as a subconscious way to be like,
Yeah,
"Okay, I'm either going here, I'm going there, I'm going there." In any direction, that was just, like, a thing I had in my head for years leading up to finally, like, not being in that situation anymore, but think, like, validating the concern that leaving is a complex process. It's not there's a lot of planning involved that needs to happen to keep you safe and other people I know a lot of people don't wanna go to shelter. Shelter is there if you need it, but if you're not going to shelter, make sure you have a secure place to go to. It
sure.
needs to be secure. That's the biggest thing. If kids are involved, the documents for your kids, like birth certificates, Social security cards, that's a big thing for medical care if you're leaving the situation to get them enrolled in school somewhere else or medical,
Yeah,
so there's a lot of things to, work through. That's why I think having, like, a support person, like a social worker or therapist, because that's, like, you can do that stuff while you're at the office, and it's
sure.
safe to do it there, and you can plan it and then leave it with your therapist, and your therapist has it or your case
Right.
manager has it, and when you're ready, let's roll.
Yeah, yeah.
And don't be afraid to it's okay to need a lot of help. Don't think you have to get out on your own.
Oh,
I had a village to help me. I did. I'm not saying you have to. I'm
yeah,
just saying don't feel like it is your responsibility to get out on your own because there are people who you've never met that will gladly help you figure this out. Even if it's on the
that
phone, even if it's calling the crisis line, even if it's calling your local shelter, even if you're not going to the shelter, they can pull up like, okay, we can go here, we can go there, we can get APO at this address, blah, blah, blah. You know?
yeah, and I think for me, it's been so funny. We've talked about, like, the pros of having, like, that Kentucky culture.
Mhm.
I was raised by a single father, so pride and ego was there's a healthy amount of pride and ego you can have, and then sometimes that gets to a point where it's unhealthy, and that was a
Mhm.
part of my narrative, and having to rely on, at times, strangers or people that I had loose associations with. Like, I think back on it now, and I don't know, I'm getting cold chills of just the willingness and love that I received from so many people who just wanted to see me be safe and okay. There was at one point in time where, well, even the landlord, like, explaining, like, I can't pay with a check or a card because I don't want there to be a transaction history that maybe someone can see. And, like, would you be willing to work with me if I paid cash? And explaining my situation, and they were,
Mhm.
yeah, we've got you. You're good. Go ahead and move on in. And then having to rely on, because at that point in time too, I was working at a job where there was something wrong with payments, and I didn't get paid for 2 months right after I left. I had no form of income, and it was just a mattress and me and some dogs on the floor. That was it. There was no furniture, there was no TV, there was nothing. And someone had given me the mattress who knew about my situation. And starting over from scratch like that. And a friend who, she was like, "Listen, I don't have any money to give you, but I have a little bit of extra funds on my WIC." And, and live figuring out how to make meals off of tuna and crackers and milk for a little bit.
Mhm.
It's one time I went to Walmart, and for whatever reason, the money hadn't loaded on the new card I was using, and I'm about to have a panic attack in the middle of
Mhm.
Walmart because this is my first time getting to buy groceries, and it's not going through. And this kind gentleman, I'd never met him a day in my life, walked up and said, it's on me. It was over $100 worth of groceries.
Aw, that's so sweet.
Um, it's just I, nobody wants to see someone struggling, I think, truly. I think there is an imperative
Mhm.
goodness and humanness about folks.
Yeah.
I know for me, I don't think the idea of even leaving wouldn't have happened if I wasn't aware of a friend of mine who is also a social worker and a
Mhm.
therapist who had recently left.
Yeah.
It had been about a year before mine, and when I had reached out to her and I was like, I don't know what to do. She was just like, "Pack a bag and come to my house right now." And
Mm.
I was like, "Oh, okay." And
Mm.
and she was like, "It's time. Like, we're just going."
Yeah.
And, uh, there is a degree of importance to us talking about it. I get so upset about topics we do not talk about enough, whether
Mhm.
that's miscarriage, whether that is domestic violence or child, like, we don't
Yeah.
talk about them, so we keep them hidden. And
Yeah.
that is a coping mechanism that a lot of Kentuckians have, and that
Mhm.
we've been taught over the generations, whether that's, if
Mhm.
you don't tell folks where you're hiding your goods at because someone might come and steal them from you,
Yeah.
but applying that to things like trauma and I need help, like,
Yeah.
we've gotta start breaking that stigma.
And I think a big thing is, like, if you are hearing this or watching this and you're a family member or a friend, I want you to know, like, how powerful you are in someone's life who is surviving this or being a victim. I wouldn't have gotten out if it wasn't for my therapist and my 2 best friends. My best friend would literally set me down towards the end and say, "This isn't it. This isn't good. I don't wanna see you. Like, who are you? I don't even know you anymore. Like, you're a shell of a person." And they just really cared about me and loved me, and even when I got out, they would challenge me when I would start thinking things that maybe weren't healthy. And I remember one time right after I got out, I would hoard chicken noodle soup because I don't know why I thought, like, that I don't know, I guess it was like a control thing or, like, thinking that I don't
Yeah.
know. So I, like, had, literally, like, 50 cans of chicken noodle soup, and my roommate was like set me down. She's like, "Whitney, we don't have to do this." And, she's my best friend to this day, like, honestly, like, these 2 women are. And so if you're that friend, just know, like, that little encouragement, that
Yeah.
honesty with the people you love is what can help get them out. If it wasn't for my friends planting the seeds, maybe this isn't healthy. Maybe this isn't okay. Maybe this isn't good for you. I don't know that it would have ended in me getting out, if that makes sense. So just know that while it might not seem like you're doing a lot, you are. And that is really powerful in a lot of people's stories is the support systems that propel them to get out of these situations.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you on the therapist aspect. I had burned through so many therapists that wanted to start talking about how maybe I wasn't the problem, but I wasn't ready to hear it yet. And I think
Mhm.
just reminding folks, like, if you have a loved one who is going through a domestic violence situation and you're like, I keep saying these things and nothing has changed for them, or why can't they see it yet? Maybe it's not the right time yet. And I know
Mhm.
that hurts to hear.
Yeah.
But by that point in my journey, I was working with a therapist who was very kindly giving these little messages like, that's interesting. I remember
Mhm.
that's what he would say, that's interesting. And I would be like, well, what makes it interesting? Like, what do you mean that's well, it's just,
Yeah.
I wonder how you would feel if your client told you this. And I'm like, ew, gross,
Oof. Yeah. That one gets
disgusting.
us.
Why would you say that? But that and seeing another woman go before me who was able to admit, like, hey, I'm a social worker and I've been a victim of domestic violence, and this is what that looks like. And
Mhm.
so if you find you have a loved one or you yourself, if anything we've talked about today sounds a little eerily familiar, if you walk away from this at all with anything, a message like you're not alone,
Mhm.
and there can be such a beautiful, beautiful narrative on the other side of this.
Yes, and you can if you want to, you can help people once you're out. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
beauty of my story is now I specialize in working with survivors of DV and IPV because I have firsthand experience, I have the training, and now I help people get out too. And that is like the most beautiful thing I think to me. It's like, oh, well, how to turn that around for turning my pain into purpose. It's like switching
Oh,
that, turning that around. And so, if you are a social worker, there can be a point where that's lived experience that you help other people if you survive that, if you get out of that situation. And if you're not in the social work field and you survive that, your story can help millions of women just sharing it if it's safely to do so. The more visibility we have of people surviving, the more hope we can give people in it to get out.
I love that and I appreciate that. And I'm so grateful. Thank you for being willing to be so like raw and vulnerable. It's so appreciated. And I think with that, until next time, and we will talk to everyone soon. Thank y'all from myself and Whitney for hanging around. Keep the message out there that surviving from this is real. Love that message of turning pain into purpose. Otherwise, the pain would just continue to exist.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
providing that energy to it to transform it into something beautiful. So, all right, everybody, y'all take good care. Until next time. Thank you, Whitney.
If you or someone you know needs help with domestic violence or intimate partner violence, call 1 800 799 7233 or text the word BEGIN to 88788 today.